All right, today we're looking at the IFERROR function in Microsoft Excel. So IFERROR function allows you to churn what are formula errors in Microsoft Excel and allows you to turn that into text, or you can turn this into a blank if you prefer, or you can turn it into a 0 or another option of your choice. So this allows you to turn these errors into something that gives you a little more context for what's happening. So let's run through a couple of these common errors, and we're going to run through some scenarios that will help you to see how to better use IFERROR in your own projects. So first off, we have a division error when you're trying to divide by 0 or potentially a blank cell. Then you get this div by 0 error. And so our options in here inside of our IFERROR is we can do this text, or as we showed you before, you can do a blank, or you can do a 0 or a custom if you want to use a different formula or so forth. Also, for your information, if you're referencing a formula with an error such as this, you can use this error type function on that cell and it'll return an error number. And so if we look at this, you can see there it shows those errors and the number that it will return. So we have next a not found error, or this NA error. And so in this case, we are using a VLOOKUP and we're looking up John in our column C, and it's not finding it, and so it's doing this error. And so in this case, we can use a not found error. One thing to note is that if you actually have a different error, so for example, this -1 is not actually valid in a VLOOKUP. So let's undo this just for a moment, and then let's do John. So it's finding John, but if we change this to -1, it's still returning that not found error. And so if you have a different problem in your formula, you want to make sure that you resolve that before you put this if error. Otherwise, you may not think you're finding something when the actual problem is that you have an error inside your formula. Next, we have this value error, and this is referring to invalid data. And so in this example, we're trying to add B6 and C6, and there's data in this C6 column. And so in this case, it's returning that error. So we can wrap it in an if error and say invalid data. Another thing we could do is use a different formula, perhaps, that will allow us to compensate. And there you can see 10, and so it's ignoring that NA. So there's different options you can do in that regard. Here, we have a invalid reference. So if you look down here, we don't have a sheet 2, so this would be referring to a different tab or sheet. We do not have a different one, and so we're returning a reference error. This can also happen if you delete columns or rows that contain a reference and it doesn't update. And so in this case, it's trying to add 5 plus that, and so it's returning an error. And so we can wrap that like this with an if error. Next, we have a name error, and so this contains unrecognized text. And so in this case, instead of sum, we have sum with 2 M's. And so there we have a function error. This is probably not one that you would use because you would have to detect that it's actually a function error, not an error with what's going on inside. So that error type is D8. Next, we have a numeric error. And this is if you try to do something invalid, such as square root of -1. And so again, we can wrap that. And then finally, we have a null error, which is similar to the function error, but in this case, this would normally be, for example, a comma. But if you neglect that comma, then you'd have that error, basically saying it can't evaluate to a function. All right, so let's take a look at some real-world examples of how you could use this. So for example, let's say you want to divide the sales by the quantity. And so if you were paying attention to that div divided by 0, you can see that we're going to have an error here because 450 divided by 0 does not evaluate anything. So let's just do a quick formula here. Let's do D15, D19 divided by C15 to C19. So there you can see our error. So what we can do in this case is wrap with an if error, and we could decide if we want 0, for example, or we could do a value, if we like, of NA, and so you can determine what you want to show up there in that case. So you can see the same thing in this column. This also works, for example, if you have text in this column, it's still showing up as that NA. And so if we remove this, we can see what happens in this case, and it still returns that error. So another thing that can happen here is maybe you're using a value function on a range. And so in this case, it would be fine. And there you can see those values. And so we could put this inside of a sum. And there we get 16. And so that's the sum of this. But now if we change this to NA, we're back to a error, because this value is trying to turn everything into a number. And so sum can automatically do this, but value cannot. So in this case, you may want to do if error and turn all non-numbers into 0, and you can see it's still returning 16. So if this gets converted to a number later, it will evaluate correctly. Next, let's look at the VLOOKUP if error. This is a very common one to use. And so we have some IDs we have a sales table and a returns table. So we have the IDs for those. And these are not overlapping, they're unique. And so let's look at, first of all, what we've shown before was a VLOOKUP. Let's put that equals in front of there. VLOOKUP, and let's search for this and this table. And then let's actually return the sales number. So D19. And then we'll return that third column and false for exact value. So currently we're returning an error, which is fine. So we could do if error and not found. Now this would be not terrible if it wasn't in either table, but let's say this was in table 2. So let's put 109. So it's still not finding it, but it's only looking in this table. So what we could do is we could nest these if errors. And so what we could do in this case is this VLOOKUP. We're going to go ahead and copy this. And instead it's not found, we're going to put this one. And so what we need to do is update this to our second table here. And now it's returning 220. So it's 109 is right here. And there's a return value of 220. So now what it's doing is this if error, if this first VLOOKUP returns an error, then it'll go to this next one. So if you had more than one, you could also nest this one. Or in this case, we probably just want to do not found in this case. So now if we do 111, which does not appear in either one, then it returns to not found. But if we go back to, say, our first range, now it's returning. So this allows us to search in either one and get the proper result. All right, that is it for today. I hope that helps you see how you can use if error in your own spreadsheets to help you streamline your projects. Make sure to check out Coefficient if you don't have it installed already to both import data automatically from your various data sources, as well as syncing and other automation. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.